I was 3 months pregnant on the day we got divorced. He was in such a rush to marry his first love that he signed the papers without even reading the fine print. I gently caressed my stomach and didn't say a single word. 10 years later, at my son's elementary school graduation ceremony, a sudden stir rippled through the auditorium. The school's biggest donor had arrived. I looked up and saw my ex-husband walking toward the stage in an impeccably tailored suit. The moment he opened his mouth and announced a $5 million donation, the entire room erupted. The principal, trembling with excitement, called the valedictorian to the stage, and my son was pushed forward. As the two stood side by side, the man froze instantly at the sight of a face that looked like an exact copy of his own. Holding my camera, I smiled, completely unfazed. "Just sign it." Aiden tossed the pen across the table. The barrel hit the mahogany surface with a sharp, hollow click. The Patek Philippe on his wrist caught the cold white glow of the family court's fluorescent lights. I glanced at the watch face. 3 p.m. His flight was at 4. He was leaving to see Chloe. My gaze shifted back to the divorce agreement. The division of assets was clear. I got the brownstone in Brooklyn, 1 car, and $5 million in cash. I read it word for word, deliberately taking my time. Aiden tapped his fingertips impatiently against the desk. Tap, 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 like a death row countdown. "Sarah, do you really need to stare at it for this long? I had my lawyer draft it." "I'm not shortchanging you a single dime," he said, his voice dripping with icy indifference. His phone buzzed on the table. The screen lit up with a contact name, Chloe. He picked it up and walked over to the window to answer it. His voice dropped to a low murmur, but he couldn't hide the smile in his tone. "Almost done. Yeah, I'm heading straight to the airport. The tickets are booked, don't worry. Hang tight, babe." Hanging up, he walked back over, his brow furrowed when he saw I still hadn't signed. "What exactly are you stalling for?" I flipped to the final page of the agreement. Under the custody and dependence clause, it read, "No children from the marriage." My hand instinctively moved to my lower stomach. It was as flat as usual. I couldn't feel a thing. But the doctor had said the baby was already 3 months along a real, living, breathing thing. I looked up at Aiden. He truly was handsome, with deep-set eyes and a sharp, high nose. Right now, though, his face held nothing but annoyance and disgust, as if I were a speck of dust ruining his designer suit. "Aiden," I began, my voice perfectly calm. "We've been married for 5 years. He let out a cold laugh, as if he'd just heard a dull joke. "So what? You want more money? Fine, name a number." He pulled a black Amex card from his wallet and threw it onto the paperwork. "The pin is your birthday. Everything in it is yours. Is that enough?" I didn't look at the card. I kept my eyes locked onto his. "Did you ever love me?" I asked. The impatience on his face instantly flared into rage, like a landmine detonating. "Sarah, stop asking such childish questions. We're adults. We're business partners." "We were," I corrected softly. "Well, we're about to be nothing," he snapped. He snatched the agreement and the pen from in front of me, flipped violently to the last page, and pointed at the signature line. "Sign it, and we're square. Take the money and live your life. Just stop clinging to me." Clinging. He said I was clinging to him. A sudden smile broke across my face. I picked up the pen and pressed the tip to the paper. "Sarah." I wrote the letters incredibly slowly, pressing down so hard the pen almost tore through the page. Once finished, I pushed the papers back to him. "There. Done." He glanced at the signature, a visible wave of relief washing over his face. Grabbing his copy, he turned and walked away without looking back. As he reached the door, he paused for a fraction of a second, as if remembering something, but he still didn't turn around. "Keep the card," he said. "Consider it a parting gift." The door clicked shut, leaving me entirely alone in the room. I stood up slowly, walked over to the trash can, and tossed the black card right into it. Then I walked out of the courthouse. The afternoon sun was blinding. I raised a hand to block the light, using my other hand to tightly shield my stomach. "Aiden, we aren't square. Our story has only just begun." 10 years passed like a silent film. I sold the Brooklyn brownstone that was completely tainted with memories of him and Chloe. Using that money, combined with all of my personal savings, I rented a small storefront in an old historic district and opened a photography studio. I named it Kronos. The day Julian was born, I spent over a dozen grueling hours alone in the delivery room. When the nurse asked where the family was, I simply replied, "He's dead." Leaving the hospital, I carried Julian wrapped in a blanket back to the tiny loft apartment above my studio. Life was brutal. Nursing, changing diapers, rocking him to sleep, all while trying to find time to edit photos, pitch to clients, and keep the business afloat. On countless late nights, holding a crying Julian while staring out at the city lights, I felt like a completely isolated island. But I never cried. Tears are the most useless currency in this world. I channeled every ounce of my energy into Julian and my camera. I captured the first time he rolled over, his first baby tooth, his first unstable steps, and the first time he called me mama. Through my lens, he was the only thing that existed. And he loved me back in his own quiet way. He was brilliant, perceptive, and never begged for expensive toys. While other kids were running wild at the playground, he would sit quietly in my studio, helping me organize props. He was the best model in my viewfinder and the only light in my life. Gradually, business at the studio began to pick up. We went from passport photos to personal portraits and eventually to major commercial shoots. Kronos earned a reputation in the industry. We finally moved out of the old district loft and into a luxury high-rise downtown. When Julian was 6, he got accepted into one of the city's top elite private international academies. The tuition fee used to be a number I wouldn't dare dream of, but now I could pay it without breaking a sweat. Over those 10 years, Aiden became a prominent financial tycoon splashed across the pages of Forbes, living in absolute glamour. And I became Sarah, a highly sought-after commercial photographer. We lived in our separate universes, like two parallel lines destined never to cross. Until the invitation to Julian's elementary school graduation ceremony arrived in my hands. Seeing the words valedictorian, Julian printed on the paper, I smiled. 10 years. I had spent a decade sharpening a blade. Now it was time to unsheath it. The night before graduation, I adjusted Julian's little white tuxedo, fixing his bow tie over and over again. "Mom, you don't need to be this nervous," Julian said, looking up at me with eyes like polished obsidian. He was 10 now, his features softening out, looking more and more like him by the day. I knelt down, smoothing out a non-existent wrinkle on his shirt. "Tomorrow is a huge day for you. And a huge day for me." Julian nodded, not fully understanding, but trusting me completely. "Mom, will you take pictures of me tomorrow?" "Of course," I said, rubbing his head gently. "Mom is going to take photos of you looking your absolute best. And I'm going to capture a few other things too. Moments I've been waiting a decade to see." I looked at my reflection in the mirror. 10 years hadn't left many physical marks on my face, but my eyes were vastly different, sharper, colder, and entirely unyielding. I opened a dust-covered box stored deep in my closet. Inside was a wedding photo of Aiden and me. The woman in the photo smiled with pure, naive happiness. Aiden wore a polite, detached smirk. I pulled the photo out and placed it right next to the 10-year-old divorce papers. On the document, his sweeping signature remained as piercing as ever. I had prepared everything. All that was left was for the curtain to rise. The graduation ceremony was held in the school's grand auditorium. The hall was lavish, packed with wealthy parents dressed in high fashion, casually tossing around multi-million-dollar business talk. I didn't sit in the parent rows. Wearing a special VIP photographer badge, I stood in the prime shooting zone right at the side of the stage. My telephoto lens pointed forward, my heart completely at peace. The headmaster was delivering a long, sweeping speech. The parents clapped politely, though their minds were clearly elsewhere. I adjusted my camera settings, my gaze sweeping over the crowd. The front 3 rows were entirely populated by the city's elite power players. Suddenly, a commotion broke out near the back doors of the auditorium. A row of bodyguards in black suits cleared a path as a man walked in, flanked by a massive entourage. He was tall, exceptionally built, and the tailored Armani suit highlighted his broad shoulders. The moment he appeared, he became the absolute center of gravity in the room. Several parents in the front rows stood up immediately to greet him, their faces plastered with sycophantic smiles. The headmaster saw him from the stage and quickly picked up his speaking pace. Now, please join me in giving the warmest round of applause to our school's most distinguished honorary board member, the founder of Apex Capital, Mr. Aiden. The spotlight shifted instantly, illuminating him. Aiden. 10 years without seeing him, and he had only grown more striking with age. His features were sharper, his aura far more dominant. He smiled, nodding smoothly to the crowd before taking his seat dead center in the front row. My lens locked onto him seamlessly. From the second he crossed the threshold, to him taking his seat, to him laughing with the people around him, I captured every single moment of his arrogance. The headmaster announced excitedly that Mr. Aiden, deeply invested in the future of education, was donating $5 million toward the construction of a new campus library. The words had barely left his mouth before the room exploded into thunderous applause. 5 million? To him, it was pocket change. But in this room, it was the ultimate display of status and generosity. Aiden stood up, taking the microphone. He spoke briefly standard corporate platitudes about giving back to the community and investing in tomorrow. His voice was low and resonant, carrying an undeniable weight that drew admiring glances from the parents, especially the mothers. I watched through the cold glass of my lens, observing him bask in the adoration of the crowd. Aiden, the higher you stand, the harder the fall. To show our deepest gratitude for Mr. Aiden's unmatched generosity, the headmaster proclaimed, "We have invited our top graduating student to present a token of appreciation." Here it comes. My heart rate finally spiked, beating against my ribs. I gripped the camera tightly. Under the collective gaze of the entire room, Julian, dressed in his white tuxedo and holding a massive bouquet of fresh flowers, walked out slowly from backstage. He was incredibly composed, his small frame held perfectly erect as he marched step by step toward Aiden at the center of the stage. The lighting technician smartly directed a secondary spotlight onto Julian. The stage transformed into a profoundly dramatic scene, 2 tracking lights, one pinning down the massive, powerful man and the other highlighting the slender, young boy. When Julian stopped in front of Aiden and looked up, and when Aiden looked down at the boy before him, their 2 faces were instantly cast in stark clarity for everyone to see. It was a face carved from the exact same mold. The same nose, the same lips, even the slight, almost imperceptible tilt at the corner of the mouth was identical. The whispering in the crowd vanished instantly. Everyone saw it. Everyone was paralyzed with shock. The polished smile on Aiden's face froze solid. The composure, the arrogance, the high and mighty demeanor shattered into absolute dust the exact second he processed Julian's face. In its place emerged a raw, terrifying look of total disbelief and mounting panic. His entire body locked up right there on stage, turning into a petrified statue. I could hear my own pulse thumping in my ears alongside the crisp, rapid click-click-click of my camera shutter. Looking through the long lens, I meticulously documented every micro-expression of his shock, horror, and total loss of control. Inside the frame, his entire world was collapsing. Outside the frame, I smiled a calm, pleasant smile. Long time no see, Aiden. Consider this the first gift of many. It felt as though time had been paused. The auditorium was deafeningly quiet. Even the sound of breathing felt magnified. Thousands of eyes darted frantically back and forth between Aiden and Julian. Shock morphed into confusion, followed by a wave of sharp, audible gasps as realization swept through the room. The resemblance was too striking. This wasn't a coincidence. It was looking at a childhood photo of Aiden come to life. Julian held the bouquet, looking slightly puzzled by the completely unraveled man standing before him. Why was this guy staring at him like he'd seen a ghost? He blinked, reached out a small hand, and gently tugged at the edge of Aiden's expensive suit jacket. "Sir?" His clear, youthful voice broke the eerie silence like a stone dropped into a glassy lake. Your flowers. Aiden flinched violently, as if hit by a live wire. His eyes tore away from Julian's face, darting around frantically as if he didn't know where to look. He tried to reach out to take the flowers, but his arms seemed weighted down by lead, completely unresponsive. He tried to speak, but his throat could only produce a hollow, raspy wheeze. Standing nearby, the headmaster's forehead was already slick with sweat. As a seasoned administrator, he smelled a massive scandal instantly. But this was a graduation ceremony filled with elite families and a live stream running. He couldn't let the situation spiral. Haha, Mr. Aiden. Mr. Aiden is likely just deeply moved by how exceptional our young Julian is. The headmaster forced a laugh, desperately winking at Aiden while trying to take the flowers from Julian's hands. Here, Julian, give the bouquet to me. We shouldn't take up any more of Mr. Aiden's valuable time. Right then, a sharp, piercing female voice sliced through the tense air. Aiden. From the crowd, a woman dressed in a tailored Chanel suit with immaculate makeup rushed up the steps onto the stage. It was Victoria, Aiden's current wife. She had attended today to bask in the glow of being Mrs. Aiden, sitting in the front row corner. Now, her face was a mask of panic and jealousy. She rushed over, violently pulling Aiden back away from Julian, positioning her body directly between them in a fierce, protective stance. Aiden, what's wrong? Are you feeling sick? Her tone was frantic with concern, but her eyes shot daggers straight at Julian. The moment she looked closely at Julian's face, the color drained from her entirely, leaving her skin ghostly pale. The pristine, heavily maintained composure of her face cracked completely. Whose kid is this? Her voice trembled violently. Aiden seemed to snap back to reality at her voice. He violently grabbed Victoria's arm, his grip so tight she let out a sharp cry of pain. Who is she? He demanded, staring dead at Victoria, though it sounded like he was asking himself. The crowd below erupted into total chaos. Oh my God, that kid looks exactly like Mr. Aiden. What is going on? Doesn't he only have one daughter with Victoria? Could this be a secret child? 10 years ago, he divorced his first wife to marry Victoria. The timeline matches perfectly. The kid looks about 10 years old. The wild speculations gathered into a massive tidal wave, crashing down on everyone on stage. Victoria's face grew whiter by the second. She knew that she and Aiden had just become the biggest joke in high society. Trying to maintain her footing, she turned to the headmaster and barked furiously, "Headmaster, is this how you handle security? Any random trash can just walk up on stage and harass our VIP guests." She called Julian trash. Julian's expression darkened immediately. He didn't like this screeching lady staring at him with venomous eyes. He silently took a step back, distancing himself from them. Meanwhile, from the side of the stage, I calmly pressed the shutter one last time. The frame captured it all: Aiden's paralyzed shock, Victoria's frantic malice, Julian's cold detachment, and the headmaster's agonizing embarrassment. It formed a picture that was both absurd and profoundly real. Enough. The goal for today had been achieved. I lowered my camera, unclipped my badge, and walked through the chaotic crowd straight onto the stage. I didn't glance at Aiden, nor did I look at Victoria. My eyes held only my son. I walked up to Julian, knelt down, and gently adjusted his slightly tilted bow tie. "Julian, are you scared?" Julian shook his head, looking at me with eyes full of absolute trust. "Mom, let's go home." "Okay," I smiled, taking his hand as we prepared to leave the disaster zone. The moment we turned around, Aiden finally broke free from his paralysis. Like a cornered, enraged beast, he let out a guttural roar. "Sarah!" He screamed my name. His voice carried 10 parts shock, 9 parts fury, and one distinct part of absolute terror that he himself hadn't even fully realized yet. Part 2. Inside the principal's executive office, the air was heavy enough to suffocate. The blinds were shut tight, sealing out the noise and prying eyes of the outside world. The graduation ceremony had been abruptly cut short, and the principal had personally escorted us into this room. Julian sat quietly on the small leather sofa next to me, holding a drawing pad in his hands. Across from me sat Aiden and Victoria, side by side. 10 years later, Our first formal face-to-face meeting was happening in a place like this. Aiden stared at me unblinkingly, the bloodshot veins in his eyes making him look almost monstrous. The polished, dignified billionaire persona he usually wore was completely gone. He looked at me as if he were staring at an old enemy resurrected from the dead. Victoria sat beside him like a cornered animal with its quills raised. She had completely lost it outside, and though she was attempting to put up a front now, the pure hatred and resentment in her eyes couldn't be masked. Victoria was the first to speak. Crossing her arms and tilting her chin up, she tried to adopt her usual high and mighty stance. "Sarah, 10 years later and you're still playing these pathetic, calculated games." I ignored her completely, picking up the porcelain teacup in front of me and blowing gently across the surface of the tea. My silence infuriated her. "Name your price," she sneered, her voice dripping with artificial superiority. "I know why you staged this little drama today. It's for money, isn't it? Raising a kid alone out there must be miserable. How much do you want?" "1 million. When I didn't react, she pushed further. 2 million? Just give us a number. On the condition that you take this kid and vanish from our lives permanently." She truly believed money could fix anything. Just like 10 years ago, when Aiden had thrown that black Amex card at my feet. I finally lifted my eyes to look at her, letting out a faint smile. "Mrs. Aiden," I said softly, "do you honestly think I look like someone who is desperate for cash?" My commercial studio's annual revenue had long since surpassed the pathetic numbers she was tossing out. The minimalist dress I was wearing was a custom piece from an independent luxury designer, costing easily double her heavily logoed Chanel suit. Victoria's expression shifted, turning an ugly shade of gray. She scanned me from head to toe, the disdain in her eyes slowly morphing into a bitter, uncontainable jealousy. 10 years had passed, but time had been incredibly kind to me. I hadn't become the exhausted, broken single mother she had envisioned. Instead, I carried a sharp, powerful composure that she could never replicate. "Shut up, Victoria," Aiden suddenly growled, cutting her off. His eyes hadn't left Julian's face for a single second. Now that the initial shock had worn off, a messy wave of conflicting emotions took over his face: regret, pain, confusion, and a strange, desperate longing. He finally turned to me, his voice incredibly hoarse. How old is he?" 10, I answered flatly. "His birthday, October 12th. Aiden's frame jolted violently, leaning back into his chair. He remembered that date perfectly. We had finalized our divorce on July 12th. I was 3 months pregnant then, and he had no idea. A full-term pregnancy, down to the exact week. His breathing grew shallow, his chest heaving. The truth was a poisoned blade driving deep into his ribs. He stared at Julian, a child who looked identical to him, a boy who should have been raised as the crown prince of his empire. Yet, for 10 years, he had known absolutely nothing. "Why?" Aiden's voice cracked, thick and raw, his eyes turning a dangerous red. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Watching his agony, my heart remained entirely still. It felt almost comical. "Tell you," I countered. "Tell you what?" "Tell you that on the very day you were happily running off to marry your first love, I was carrying your child? Tell you that when you threw that no children agreement at me and told me to hurry up and sign so I wouldn't waste your time, I was carrying your child? Tell you that when you tossed that credit card at me like garbage, using money to stomp on the last shred of our marriage, I was carrying your child?" With every sentence I spoke, the remaining color drained from Aiden's face. My tone remained entirely conversational, void of any explosive anger, but each word hit him like a sledgehammer. "Aiden, tell me, how exactly was I supposed to tell you back then? Did you even deserve to know?" He was completely silenced, gasping for air like a fish pulled from water. Sitting next to him, Victoria's face twisted between rage and humiliation. She surged to her feet, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Sarah, you calculated, venomous woman. You did this on purpose. Hiding him for 10 years just to bring him out now to ruin us? You think you can use this kid to crawl your way back into the family? Let me tell you, keep dreaming." Julian, who had been sitting quietly the entire time, knit his small brows. He stood up, walked over and positioned his small body directly in front of me, looking right up at Victoria. "Ma'am, please do not raise your voice at my mom," he said, his small frame projecting an undeniable authority. "My mom is the person I love most in this world. I won't let anyone bully her." At that exact moment, the final pieces of Aiden's composure shattered completely. Julian's words were a silent, devastating slap across both their faces. Victoria's expression twisted into something ugly. She had clearly never been spoken to like this by a child and found herself entirely speechless. As for Aiden, staring at the tiny silhouette shielding me, the last shred of doubt inside him vanished. This was his son, a brave, sharp, fiercely loyal boy protecting his mother like a man. And he had missed every single second of it. My heart softened. I reached out, pulled Julian back to my side, and gently stroked his hair. "Beautifully said, Julian." Then I stood up, casting a calm glance at the two unraveling people across from me. "I don't believe we have anything left to discuss. This circus is over." My objective had been fulfilled. There was no reason to waste another breath on them. "Sarah, stop right there." Aiden bolted upright, taking several frantic steps forward to grab my wrist. I shifted Julian to my other side, stepping away smoothly. His hand remained frozen in midair, looking incredibly pathetic and weak. "What do you think you're doing?" His voice was panicked, carrying a sudden, desperate plea. "Where are you taking him?" "Home," I said simply. "Home? Where is home?" He looked like a drowning man grasping at straws. "The old place in Brooklyn?" "No, that's too small. I have an estate in the Hamptons, top-tier security. You both move there. I'll arrange it immediately, Mr. Aiden." I cut off his unraveled planning, my tone sharp with mockery. "Have you lost your mind? We've been divorced for 10 years. Where my son and I live has absolutely nothing to do with you. He is my son too," he roared, his eyes entirely bloodshot, looking like a trapped animal. "Is he?" I reached into my bag and pulled out a document, a slightly faded piece of paper. It was a copy of our divorce decree. I unfolded it and held it right in front of his face. "You signed this yourself. You still recognize your own handwriting, right?" My finger landed squarely on the line that read, "No children from the marriage." Black and white. A massive, beautiful irony. Aiden stared at the text, the strength entirely draining from his legs. He stumbled back a step, colliding heavily with the edge of the principal's desk with a dull thud. Yes, he had signed it with his own hand. He had legally cut off every single tie to this child himself. "Sarah," he whispered, his voice laced with pure despair. "You are terrifyingly cruel." I smiled, though the warmth never reached my eyes. "Compared to what you did to me 10 years ago, I still have a long way to go. Back then, you forced me to sign. Today, I'm just giving you a little reminder. We're square." Without another word, I took Julian's hand, turned around, and walked out the door. "Mom, was that man my dad?" On the drive back, Julian leaned into my side, asking softly. The car was quiet, filled only with the steady hum of the electric engine. I knew this conversation would happen eventually. I smoothed down his hair, my voice gentle but unyielding. "Julian, legally speaking, you only have a mother. As for biology, it only matters if there is love and responsibility behind it. A person who abandons his post for 10 years doesn't get to be called a father. You just need to remember that I will always love you twice as much. That's all that matters." Julian nuzzled closer into my arm, nodding perceptively. "Yeah, having you is enough for me." I glanced in the rearview mirror as the lavish gates of the academy grew smaller and smaller, eventually vanishing into the city traffic. The reunion I had orchestrated for 10 years had reached its conclusion, but a different kind of war was about to begin. Back in the principal's office, Victoria looked at the completely hollowed-out Aiden, terror and fury twisting violently inside her. "Aiden, pull yourself together." She grabbed his arm, shaking him violently. "What do we do now?" "Tomorrow, every tabloid in the city is going to run headlines about Apex Capital's secret child. What happens to the stock price? Where does that leave our family's reputation?" Aiden didn't seem to hear a single word. He violently shoved her away, stumbling over to the window and tearing open the blinds. Down below, my car was slowly merging into the afternoon traffic. He slammed his fist violently against the glass pane. Check, he rasped, his voice rough but laced with an absolute, terrifying intensity. Run a full background check on her. Everything Sarah and that kid have done over the past 10 years. Every single detail. I want the complete file on my desk. Immediately. He didn't want a legal war. He wanted them back. Part 3. Aiden locked himself inside his penthouse office at Apex Capital for a full 24 hours. He didn't sleep a single wink, nor did he touch any food. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city shifted from day to night, and from night to a crisp morning. The red veins in his eyes grew increasingly severe. For the first time in 10 years, he felt a terrifying sense of absolute loss of control. He had built a massive financial empire. He was accustomed to dictating terms, measuring the universe through numbers and capital. He had always believed he was the grandmaster moving the chess pieces, while everyone else was a pawn. Until Julian appeared. That boy, with a face that was an exact replica of his own, had ripped a devastating, bloody tear right through his perfectly constructed reality. His executive assistant, Ryan, knocked softly and stepped into the room, his footsteps incredibly light. "Mr. Aiden, the complete file you requested is right here." A thick manila folder was placed carefully on the desk. Aiden's hand shook slightly. It took a significant amount of effort for him to pick up the folder and slide the contents out onto the desk. Stacks of documents, piles of photographs, 10 years of Sarah and Julian's lives laid bare. The first document was a real estate transaction record. Less than a month after the divorce, Sarah had sold the Brooklyn brownstone he had left her. The closing price was 10% below market value. She was clearly desperate to rid herself of it. She hadn't kept a single piece of sentimentality. Next was the business registration information. A commercial photography studio named Kronos, registered at an obscure address in the historic district. The sole proprietor, Sarah. Then came the photographs. The pictures documented everything. In a dilapidated loft apartment, Sarah held a swaddled infant Julian, her face lined with exhaustion, but her eyes dripping with absolute, profound tenderness. In the studio, she edited images on her monitor while using her foot to gently rock a baby bassinet beside her chair. On Julian's first birthday, the mother and son shared a tiny slice of cake inside a cramped but neatly kept rented space. At Julian's first preschool field day, Sarah ran behind the children carrying heavy camera gear, drenched in sweat, just to capture the exact second her son crossed the finish line. Each photograph felt like a jagged blade carving pieces out of Aiden's heart. He had missed it. He had missed the birth, the first cry, the first smile, the first steps, the first words. As a father, he had been completely, shamefully absent during the most critical years of his son's life. He finally reached the copy of Julian's birth certificate. Mother, Sarah. Under the father's information line, there were 3 piercing words: deceased/unknown. Deceased. Aiden felt his heart violently constricted, making it difficult to breathe. While he was out expanding his empire and celebrating his new marriage, in Sarah's universe, he was already dead. It was a profound, soul-deep severing. He kept reading. Kronos grew larger and more successful, moving from the old district loft into a premium downtown commercial tower. Sarah's name began appearing frequently in fashion magazines and photography award lists. She had dragged herself out of the mud entirely on her own, burning brighter than anyone could have anticipated. And Julian, the boy raised entirely in his absence, was a straight-A student, winning numerous academic awards, highly polite and articulate, the absolute gold standard of an exceptional child. The final page of the report detailed the current financial health and major client portfolio of Kronos Studio. The annual revenue had long since crossed the 8-figure mark, boasting partnerships with top-tier luxury brands and multinational corporations. She had built her own empire, an independent, formidable kingdom that relied on absolutely no one. Aiden leaned back heavily into his executive chair, closing his eyes. It turned out that during the decade of his absence, The woman he thought would easily crumble had transformed into someone entirely unrecognizable. Regret, agony, and a strange, deep jealousy washed over him like a tidal wave. But he was still Aiden. After a brief moment of disorientation, his baseline instinct took over a fierce, almost manic possessiveness. He had missed 10 years, so he would use the next few decades to make up for it. He wanted his woman and his son back by his side, no matter the cost. Since she had built her own little kingdom, he would simply crush it with his own hands. He would make her see that the independence and achievements she was so proud of were utterly meaningless in the face of absolute, crushing capital. He opened his eyes, the brief flash of vulnerability completely vanished, replaced by the cold, calculating detachment of a billionaire tycoon. He picked up the intercom phone, his voice dropping into a low, commanding tone. "Ryan, notify all of our corporate subsidiaries and investment partners immediately. Any company with active business ties to Apex Capital must terminate all contracts with Kronos Photography Studio effective immediately. Anyone who refuses will find their funding permanently cut. Furthermore, contact the property management firm of the commercial tower where her studio is located. I want to buy the entire building. Pass a message along to her. She either brings my son and comes to find me, or I will ensure she completely vanishes from this industry. No clients, no office space. Nothing." He would drive her into a corner until she had no choice but to choose him. Part 4. 3 days after the graduation scandal, life seemed to return to its regular tracks. No news regarding Aiden's secret child surfaced on the internet. It was as if that explosive day had never occurred. But I knew this was merely the brief, deceptive stillness before the hurricane arrived. Understanding Aiden as I did, he was incapable of letting this go. He was a wolf that wouldn't release a target once his teeth were sunk in. The silence simply meant he was gathering strength in the shadows for a lethal strike. Over those 3 days, I canceled all my professional engagements to focus entirely on Julian. We went to the Science Museum, the amusement park, and visited his favorite artisanal ice cream parlor. I wanted to use double the affection to quietly repair any cracks that day might have left in his mind. Julian appeared perfectly normal, clinging to me even more than usual, which allowed me to let out a small sigh of relief. On the morning of the 4th day, I walked back into Kronos' studio. The moment I stepped through the doors, my business partner and head assistant, Mia, rushed over with a profoundly grim expression. "Sarah, we have a massive situation." "Speak," I said, putting my bag down, already expecting the worst. "We received 3 cancellation calls back-to-back this morning. The autumn campaign shoot for the luxury label is dead. The cover shoot for next month's fashion feature has brought in a replacement photographer. And the corporate documentary for the conglomerate we've been pitching for 6 months? They just called to terminate negotiations." Mia spoke rapidly, her tone strained with panic. Those 3 projects represented the studio's primary revenue stream for the latter half of the year. Every contract had been ironclad, completely secure. Yet, in a single morning, they were wiped clean off our boards. This was absolutely no coincidence. The rest of the staff in the office sensed the shift. The air felt suffocatingly heavy. What justification did they provide? I asked calmly. The fashion brand claimed they found a team that aligned better with their new direction. The magazine claimed the editor-in-chief had a sudden change of heart. And the conglomerate? They actually had the nerve to claim our company's office had bad energy. Mia's face flushed with anger. It's an absolute insult. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the endless stream of traffic below. As expected, he had moved. And he went straight for the throat right out of the gate. He wanted to use this method to warn me that he could easily demolish everything I had spent a decade building. "Sarah, what do we do? With these 3 projects gone, our cash flow for the next 2 quarters is completely broken. Forget expanding, maintaining our current payroll is going to be a massive problem." Mia's voice trembled. I turned around, gently patting her shoulder. "What is there to panic about?" My voice wasn't loud, but it instantly brought absolute silence to the room. The sky isn't falling. We've survived far worse storms than this over the past 10 years. We stayed afloat when things were genuinely hopeless. You think this is enough to break us apart? Not a chance. My calm delivery acted like a strong anchor, stabilizing the anxious energy of the team. Everyone's salary and bonuses will be paid in full, down to the last dollar. Keep working as usual, focus on the remaining client assets on our boards. I will handle the rest. After reassuring the team, I walked into my private office and shut the door. The phone on my desk rang right on cue. An unknown number. I picked it up but remained silent. From the other end came a voice I hadn't heard in 10 years, yet recognized instantly. It appears you've received my greeting. It was Aiden. His tone was low, carrying the smug satisfaction of a dictator. Sarah, this is just the opening act. If I can halt your corporate partnerships, I can make every single client turn their backs on you. I can strip away your projects, and I can ensure you can't lease a single square inch of commercial space in this city. I don't care to waste words. My terms are simple. First, take Julian and move into the estate in the Hamptons. Second, resign from your studio. I will cover every single one of your expenses moving forward. Third, hold a press conference acknowledging Julian as my son so we can establish joint custody. Every single sentence was a direct command, leaving zero room for negotiation. He wasn't proposing a deal, he was issuing a final ultimatum. He wanted to completely sever my independence, locking Julian and me securely inside his sphere of control. I listened quietly until he finished, then let out a soft laugh. Aiden, have you forgotten that you are a businessman? He paused, clearly not expecting this specific reaction. I have just one question for you, I said deliberately. To completely destroy my studio, how much capital do you estimate you'll need to burn through? 100 million? A billion? Burning $1 billion just to secure an outcome that pleases your ego, that doesn't strike me as a particularly intelligent business calculation. Especially since you are entirely incapable of securing that outcome. The breathing on the other end grew visibly sharper. What exactly do you mean by that? It's very simple. I walked over to my computer and opened an encrypted folder containing the high-resolution images I had captured during the graduation ceremony, the sharp of Aiden's unraveled shock, Victoria's venomous jealousy, and the silhouette of Julian standing protectively in front of me. You are attempting to crush me with capital, but the currency I hold is public perception. Tell me, if I leak these images alongside a detailed investigative piece about a financial billionaire abusing his corporate power to target his ex-wife and steal her child, how many points do you think Apex Capital's stock price will drop tomorrow morning? Do you think the clients you threatened would be happy to anonymously corroborate the story to Wall Street journalists? Will the public rally behind a billionaire CEO crushing a self-made single mother, or will they support the woman who raised a brilliant child alone for 10 years while her ex-husband tried to destroy her livelihood? I clicked the mouse, sending a high-res shot of his completely unraveled expression directly to his phone via an encrypted message. Aiden, let's play a different game. This round is an all-out media war. Your move. With that, I hung up the phone. Aiden stared fixedly at his smartphone screen. The display showed his own face, twisted in absolute shock against the backdrop of the grand auditorium, contrasted against Julian's remarkably composed features. Sarah's photographic execution was flawless. The lighting, composition, and timing were calculated to absolute perfection. The image possessed immense narrative weight and visual impact, easily enough for anyone to construct a massive high society scandal in their minds. He could easily visualize the absolute firestorm that would erupt the second this image went public. Sarah's quiet words echoed repeatedly in his ears. A media war. For the first time, he recognized that the capital and authority he prided himself on could be entirely useless in specific arenas. He could buy out a single media outlet, but he couldn't silence millions of voices. He could manipulate search algorithms, but he couldn't purchase public trust. For the first time, he found a situation truly unmanageable. The woman he thought he could easily manipulate held a razor-sharp blade pressed directly against his throat. He hurled the phone violently against the wall, the expensive device shattering into pieces. He had lost the first round, completely and utterly. Part 5. The next day, the tide of public perception shifted quietly across the digital space. However, the catalyst wasn't a dirty tabloid leak about Aiden, but rather a profound investigative feature. One of the nation's most respected digital journalism platforms published a long-form article titled Kronos, One Woman and Her 10-Year War. The author was a veteran journalist renowned for her sharp, humanistic lens and meticulous reporting. The 10,000-word feature never explicitly named Aiden, nor did it indulge in cheap high society gossip. Instead, it adopted a documentary-style detachment, matter-of-factly tracing the journey of a woman named Sarah over the past decade. It cataloged the transformation from a homemaker who surrendered her career for marriage to a woman exiting a broken relationship with zero assets, to the discovery of her pregnancy and signing her own surgical consent forms alone in a delivery room. It tracked her building a business from a dilapidated loft while nursing an infant, slowly transforming Kronos into one of the most respected creative agencies in the market. The article was packed with verified, gritty realities. It detailed how, to preserve capital, she survived on 2 packs of instant ramen a day for 3 consecutive months. It described her carrying 40 pounds of camera gear through sub-zero temperatures on a mountain range with her toddler strapped to her front, shooting for an entire day. It recalled the night Julian ran a dangerous fever, and she sprinted through empty city streets in the dead of night, weeping while carrying him to the emergency room. Those specific details had come from Mia, my most trusted ally and the sole witness to those grueling 10 years. I had instructed her to contact the journalist, authorizing the release of the narrative. Naturally, all personal identifiers relating to Aiden were scrubbed, referred to simply as her former spouse. The visual assets accompanying the piece were curated with extreme intent, showing the evolution of the studio from a cramped loft to a premium creative house, Julian's growth from an infant to a young boy, and silhouettes of Sarah working under extreme environmental conditions. The final image was a side profile of me adjusting Julian's bow tie at the graduation ceremony. In the photo, I was kneeling on the floor, looking up at my son with an expression full of every ounce of tenderness and pride I possessed. The caption read, "You are the sharpest blade I have spent 10 years sharpening." Within a matter of hours, the feature surpassed 10 million views, dominating every social media platform. There were no cheap sensational elements, no ugly public arguments, just a narrative of a woman enduring betrayal and hardship, leveraging her resilience and professional expertise to execute a flawless self-salvation. She instantly became a symbol for modern women, resilient, independent, powerful, and elite. The comment sections were entirely flooded with respect and advocacy. This is what a real powerhouse looks like. Relying on no one, burning brighter than anyone else. I'm in tears. Reading this makes you realize how formidable a mother can truly be. I'm incredibly curious about what that blind ex-husband looks like right now. He must be drowning in regret. Booking a slot at Kronos Studio immediately. Let's support her business. Public sentiment was now entirely anchored on my side. The studio's phone lines were completely jammed with bookings extending into the following year. The corporate brands that had surrendered to Aiden's pressure found their public relations channels paralyzed by furious consumers. I sat in my office, observing the metrics quietly. This was the exact outcome I had engineered. I didn't need to play the victim to solicit pity. I wanted the universe to recognize my value, my expertise, and my absolute irreplaceability. I wanted Aiden to understand that Sarah was not an extension of him, let alone a target he could easily manipulate. As evening fell, the phone rang again. The same number. I answered, speaking first this time. "Mr. Aiden, are you satisfied with the return gift I delivered today?" A long, heavy silence stretched across the line. Finally, Aiden's voice came through, thick with suppressed rage but forced to submit. "Sarah, you win. Let's talk." I selected a private, exclusive tea house that operated strictly on a reservation-only basis for our meeting. The traditional courtyard was quiet and elegant, the sound of flowing water gentle, a perfect setting for discussing matters that needed to remain out of the public eye. I arrived 30 minutes early, ordering a pot of premium black tea. By the time Aiden opened the door to the private room, I had already finished my first cup. He had shed his rigid corporate suit, opting instead for a dark gray cashmere sweater, attempting to project a relaxed demeanor. However, the bloodshot veins in his eyes and the tight line of his jaw betrayed his internal chaos. He arrived completely alone, no Victoria, no assistance. This indicated he was finally willing to drop his arrogant CEO persona and speak with me as an equal. He took a seat across from me, silently watching as I poured him a cup of tea. The amber liquid swirled gently against the white porcelain. "Sarah," he finally spoke, his voice far rougher than it had been over the phone. "I apologize for my previous actions. I shouldn't have interfered with your business in that manner." This apology arrived a decade too late, and it possessed absolutely no sincerity. I remained silent, simply making a gesture for him to continue. He took a deep breath, carefully assembling his words. "I admit, the second I saw Julian, I completely lost my bearings. It was my failure not to know of his existence over these past 10 years. Now, I want to make it right. I reviewed his files. He is truly exceptional. You raised him incredibly well." He paused, a flash of genuine pain crossing his features. "Far, far superior to my other child. His daughter with Victoria. I knew of her, a spoiled heiress with an atrocious temperament and mediocre academic standing, sustained entirely by family wealth. I want to be part of his life moving forward." He cut to the core of his agenda. "I won't contest legal custody. He stays with you. I trust your care. But I require visitation rights, at least 2 days a week. I want him to know the rest of the family, to take his rightful place at our family gatherings. As compensation, I will establish a blind trust for Julian with an open-ended funding amount. Every single educational expense from now until he finishes his PhD will be completely covered by me. I will secure the finest educators globally. Furthermore, I am prepared to transfer 10% of Apex Capital's equity directly into his name right now." He laid out his cards: wealth, access, status. The exact same playbook. He truly believed these assets could purchase the father-son relationship he had abandoned. I slowly lowered my teacup, the base meeting the table with a soft click. "Aiden, you seem to be laboring under a massive delusion." I locked my eyes onto his, delivering each word deliberately. "The only reason I agreed to sit across from you today wasn't to listen to your terms. I came here to reject you." His pupils contracted sharply. "Julian does not require a father named Aiden in his universe. Everything he possesses today was earned through my labor and his own brilliance. We are doing exceptionally well. We have no use for your compensation. Your shares, your trust funds, your elite family networks, to us, they are completely worthless." "Sarah," his chest heaved with mounting anger, "you are letting your personal resentment deprive him of his rightful legacy. That is entirely unfair to the boy." "Unfair?" I let out a cold laugh, as if hearing a hilarious joke. 10 years ago, when you abandoned me for Victoria, did you ever consider what was fair to me? When you left me entirely alone at the family court, discarding our marriage like trash, did you think about fairness? What right do you have to lecture me on fairness today?" My tone turned entirely cold. "What you truly desire isn't redemption, nor is it fatherly affection. You simply cannot tolerate the existence of something that belongs to you, but remains entirely outside your control. The more exceptional Julian becomes, the more he exposes the failure of your own household. My complete disregard for you is a direct assault on your fragile ego. You simply want to regain control. Aiden, I understand your psychology far better than you do." He turned completely pale, his face shifting between anger and humiliation, his knuckles turning white as he gripped his teacup. The negotiation had reached an absolute standstill. After a long silence, he appeared completely drained of strength, slumping back against his chair. "What exactly do you want from me?" he rasped, a trace of absolute despair in his voice. "I want nothing from you." I stood up, looking down at him. "I am simply reminding you that from the exact second you signed those divorce papers, you ceased to have any connection to me or Julian. You walk your path, and we will walk ours. That is how it was, and that is how it will remain." I turned to leave the room. "Wait," he called out. "Name your price. You claim I lack the right, fine. Give me the terms that would give me a chance." I paused, keeping my back to him. Fine, if you insist. You want to know what it would take? It's very simple. First, hold a global press conference delivering a public apology to me for abandoning our marriage 10 years ago. Second, transfer 51% of your personal voting shares in Apex Capital unconditionally to Julian, managed by me until he turns 18. Third, divorce Victoria immediately and legally guarantee you will never remarry for the rest of your life. Execute these 3 conditions, and I will permit you to see Julian for 1 hour a week. In my presence. After I finished speaking, the private room fell completely silent. Aiden sat there, utterly motionless, like a stone carving. He recognized that the terms I proposed were an absolute, unadulterated humiliation, conditions he could never accept. I was simply returning his own playbook to him, completely unaltered. Without waiting for his response, I opened the door and walked out into the afternoon sun. Part 6. When Aiden arrived home, it was already the dead of night. A single lamp was illuminated in the living room, where Victoria sat on the sofa wrapped in a silk robe, a facial mask applied to her skin, clearly waiting for his return. Seeing him enter, she stood up immediately, her tone sharp and critical. How did it go? Did you finalize terms with that ex-wife of yours? Did she demand a number that made your heart skip a beat, preparing to bring that child back into this house and toss me out onto the street? Aiden didn't even lift his eyes. He walked directly to the liquor cabinet, poured a glass of neat whiskey, and threw it back in one motion. The burning alcohol tore down his throat, but it couldn't suppress the chaotic thoughts violently churning in his mind. The 3 conditions Sarah had proposed felt like 3 consecutive slaps ringing loudly in his brain. She wasn't negotiating, she was passing judgment on him. I am speaking to you. Have you gone deaf? Seeing him ignore her, Victoria's fury flared. She rushed over, attempting to snatch the glass from his hand. Get away from me. Aiden violently threw his hand out, shoving her aside. Victoria stumbled back, crashing heavily onto the sofa, her facial mask slipping to one side to reveal a face completely distorted by rage. Aiden, you dare lay a hand on me? For that woman and her kid, she shrieked. Listen to me carefully, Victoria. Aiden turned around, his eyes locking onto hers with the cold intensity of a blade. If I ever hear you refer to him in that manner again, you can pack your bags and get the hell out of this house. Victoria was completely stunned by the sheer malice in his eyes. Over their 10 years of marriage, though Aiden hadn't shown her immense affection, he had always maintained a polite, dignified front. She had never seen him this unraveled, this terrifying. She finally processed that the appearance of that 10-year-old boy had completely undermined her security in this household. She didn't dare scream further, compressing her voice into a tearful whine. Aiden, I am your wife. Our daughter is the legal heir to the family fortune. How can you treat me like this for outsiders? Outsiders. Aiden let out a bitter laugh. He is my biological son. My firstborn. The thought of Julian brought a heavy, suffocating pain to his chest, regret washing over him. He poured another drink, finishing it instantly before slamming the glass onto the table. Negotiations with Sarah failed completely. He slumped onto the sofa, rubbing his temples, his face lined with an exhaustion he had never experienced before. For the first time, he realized that capital couldn't fix everything. Sarah was like a hedgehog covered in razor-sharp quills, completely immune to both threats and bribes, entirely flawless. Attempting to force a breakthrough from her side was impossible. Victoria stood frozen. In her mind, an abandoned woman like Sarah should be weeping, begging for financial security and a legal title. How could she completely reject a billionaire's terms? Aiden ignored her, his mind working rapidly. Force wouldn't work, and diplomacy had failed. Since the adults were a brick wall, the sole remaining entry point was the child, Julian. He required an opportunity, a natural scenario where he could spend time with Julian, slowly cultivating an emotional bond. An opportunity to make Julian recognize that a father could provide him with a future 1,000 times grander than anything Sarah could build. However, Sarah guarded Julian like a wolf protecting her cub. Any encroaching threat would be torn to pieces. Forcing a confrontation would only heighten the boy's defenses. He needed a catalyst, a natural, legitimate scenario that couldn't be rejected. Aiden's eyes flashed in the dim light. He recalled a specific detail from the file his assistant had compiled regarding Julian's personal interests. Julian, age 10. Deeply invested in artificial intelligence and robotics programming. Won second place in the National Youth Robotics Competition. A strategy materialized rapidly in his mind. He pulled out his phone, dialing his assistant's number. Ryan, contact the robotics lab at MIT immediately. I don't care what the cost is. Secure their elite research team to fly down and host an exclusive, one-week intensive youth AI summer camp. On the other end, Ryan paused for a fraction of a second before responding smoothly. Understood, Mr. Aiden. This camp will be exclusively sponsored by Apex Capital. No public registration. Attendance is strictly by invitation only. The venue will be our premium luxury resort upstate. Furthermore, issue formal invitations in my personal name to every youth who has secured a state-level award in robotics or programming. Full expenses covered. The critical detail: ensure Julian's name is at the absolute top of the invitation list. Aiden hung up the phone, a cold, confident smile returning to his lips. Sarah, you think you can lock me out? I am presenting your son with a gift his intellect cannot refuse, the absolute pinnacle of global resources. Let's see how you block me this time. This war is far from over. I won't force you. I will make you and your son willingly step inside the golden cage I have constructed for you. Part 7. The invitation arrived at the apartment a week later. The elegant, gold-embossed envelope bore the seal of the MIT Research Lab alongside the corporate logo of Apex Capital. When Julian returned from school and saw the envelope, his eyes illuminated instantly. Mom, it's the MIT AI summer camp. Oh my God, Professor Daniel is leading it. He's my absolute idol. He tore open the envelope excitedly, his small face flushing with pure joy. The document detailed a 7-day, fully immersive residency program. The curriculum was directed entirely by top scientists from the MIT Artificial Intelligence Lab, offering hands-on access to cutting-edge robotics technology. To a child completely obsessed with programming, this was an absolute, irresistible dream. Julian held the invitation, looking up at me with eyes full of intense anticipation. Mom, can I go? Please? I want to go so badly. Staring into his bright eyes, a cold sensation filled my chest. Aiden. This move was incredibly precise. He understood that while I would reject any material asset he offered, I would never have the heart to strip away an opportunity connected to my son's passion and future. He left me absolutely no room to decline. If I refused to let Julian attend, I would become the person actively crushing my child's aspirations, potentially planting a seed of resentment or confusion in his mind. If I consented, I would be walking right into his trap, a closed residency camp situated entirely within a luxury resort under his complete control. Over 7 days, he would have 1,000 different ways to approach Julian, to influence him. A masterclass in corporate manipulation. Mom? Seeing my prolonged silence, the excitement on Julian's face slowly dimmed, replaced by a trace of anxiety. Is there a problem? I snapped back to reality, taking a deep breath and offering him a warm smile. Of course you can go. This is an incredible opportunity, something you earned through your own brilliance. I am immensely proud of you. We are absolutely going. Yes! Mom, you're the best. Julian shouted, throwing his arms around my neck and planting a hard kiss on my cheek before running back to his room, desperate to review Professor Daniel's published research papers. Watching his retreating figure, my gaze turned incredibly cold. Aiden, you think this guarantees a win? If you want to play games, I will play with you until the absolute end. On the opening day of the camp, I personally drove Julian upstate to the luxury resort. The estate was nestled halfway up a mountain range, boasting stunning alpine scenery and tight security checkpoints. A massive banner reading Apex Capital Youth AI Camp hung across the main entrance. After completing the registration formalities at the front desk, I walked with Julian into the grand lobby. Before we could take a dozen steps, a familiar figure materialized directly in front of us. Aiden was dressed casually today, wearing an approachable smile, presenting himself merely as an invested corporate sponsor checking on the event's progress. Beside him stood an elderly gentleman with silver hair, Professor Daniel, Julian's idol. Welcome, Julian. It's a pleasure to have you here. Aiden stepped forward, his focus anchoring entirely on Julian, his tone warm and fatherly. He then turned his eyes toward me, a complex emotion flashing through his gaze. Julian responded politely, "Hello, Mr. Aiden." He didn't call him uncle or dad. Clearly, his impression of this man remained anchored entirely on the graduation scandal and the sparse, careful explanations I had provided. Aiden didn't seem to mind, smiling as he introduced the professor. "This is Professor Daniel. He has been incredibly eager to meet you." The moment Julian processed Professor Daniel, he shifted instantly into pure student mode, conversing in fluent English, his eyes sparkling with pure admiration. Aiden didn't interrupt them, stepping closer to my side and dropping his voice to a murmur. "You came." "My son is here. Of course I am here," I responded coldly. "I half expected you to block him from attending." "Why would I do that? I am not like you, Sarah. I don't believe in forcing my personal restrictions onto a child." I fired back without a shred of hesitation. My words hit their mark, his expression instantly darkening. "Sarah, I engineered this entirely to get closer to him, to understand him. I have no ulterior motives," he attempted to explain. "Whether you have ulterior motives isn't dictated by your words." I looked over at my son, who was laughing happily with his idol, my strategy completely finalized. Once the staff guided Professor Daniel toward the seminar rooms, I took Julian's hand and stepped directly in front of Aiden. "Mr. Aiden, thank you for providing the children with such an exceptional opportunity." I delivered the formal corporate gratitude smoothly, before executing a sharp pivot. However, my son has never spent a single night away from me since birth. Leaving him alone at a fully enclosed residency program isn't something I am comfortable with. Therefore, I paused, meeting his completely unraveled expression with a calm smile. "I will be staying here for the duration of the 7 days. I've heard the mountain spa facilities here are unmatched. I can enjoy a vacation while remaining close to my son. And, incidentally, I can observe exactly what kind of game certain individuals are trying to play." The polished smile on Aiden's face froze entirely. Part 8. Aiden's facial expression in that moment was the most exquisite visual performance I had witnessed in a decade, shifting from absolute shock to a pale rage, before forcing out a grimace that looked more like a sob than a smile. "Fine. Excellent," he managed to spit out through clenched teeth. "We are thrilled to welcome you, Miss Sarah. Ryan, arrange the absolute highest-tier luxury spa suite in the resort for Ms. Sarah immediately. Ensure she and Julian experience our absolute best hospitality." He delivered the words hospitality with a heavy, threatening emphasis, an absolute warning. I adopted complete oblivion, smiling and nodding smoothly. "Then I appreciate your generosity, CEO Aiden." The suite assigned to us was indeed the absolute pinnacle of the resort's inventory, boasting massive floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over snow-capped pines, a private indoor-outdoor thermal pool, and 24-hour butler service. Aiden wanted to leverage this luxury to signal that this was his territory, that every comfort I enjoyed was an act of his charity. Unfortunately for him, his calculations were entirely off. I occupied the space with complete peace of mind, while providing him with absolutely zero opportunities to interact with Julian. The camp's itinerary was packed to the brim. During the morning sessions led by Professor Daniel's team, I sat quietly in the absolute back corner of the seminar room like an ordinary parent, taking sparse notes in a leather journal. However, my peripheral vision remained locked onto Aiden. He would conveniently materialize at the entrance of the classroom, pretending to inspect operations, while his gaze anchored entirely on Julian. During the afternoon laboratory sessions, I shifted into my professional identity, carrying my high-end camera gear to document the children's focus. My lens consistently managed to position itself directly between Aiden and Julian, ensuring his fatherly glances had absolutely nowhere to land. When evening arrived, Aiden would instruct staff to deliver premium omakase courses to our suite or extend invitations to join him at his private dining room. I never declined, but I consistently controlled the conversation, anchoring it strictly to academic paradigms, robotics theory, and future technological landscapes. Julian was an absolute chatterbox when it came to his passion. All I needed to do was toss out a complex technical prompt, and the dialogue between him and Aiden would dissolve entirely into engineering semantics, leaving absolutely no room for personal sentimentality. Whenever Aiden attempted to steer the narrative toward family or lineage, I would smoothly redirect it. Julian, your affinity for engineering, do you think you inherited that from your father? Before Julian could process the question, I would interject with a smile. He doesn't take after anyone in that regard. It's entirely his own distinct curiosity. Just as my affinity for photography is driven purely by passion. As a financial executive, Mr. Aiden, you surely understand that raw talent and organic interest yield the absolute best return on investment. With a single sentence, I would sever the biological thread, converting it into cold corporate logic. Within a few days, Aiden looked visibly defeated. He had clearly never anticipated that the authority and wealth he relied on would prove entirely useless against me. I was like a wall of dense cotton. Every ounce of force he threw at me was absorbed silently, leaving him to suffocate on his own suppressed frustration. Julian remained entirely connected to me, showing absolutely no interest in distancing himself. He was thoroughly accustomed to my presence, running over during laboratory breaks to wrap his arms around my neck, animatedly explaining the new algorithms he had coded. The organic, beautiful synergy between mother and son stood in sharp, painful contrast to Aiden's absolute isolation. Standing a few paces away, watching us laugh together, he looked like a lone wolf discarded by the pack. He was finally processing that biology isn't a check that can be cashed at will. The deficit he owed from 10 years of absence was a complete, irreplaceable childhood. On the fourth day of the camp, the paradigm shifted. The curriculum for the day was an intensive robotics tournament. The children were randomly divided into 10 teams, tasked with engineering a robot from raw components to execute a highly complex operational matrix. The winning team would secure the camp's highest honor, a personalized letter of recommendation signed by Professor Daniel, alongside the elite youth scholarship funded by Apex Capital. The team assignments were decided via a blind draw on site. Julian's luck appeared exceptionally poor. His two assigned teammates consisted of a brilliant but thoroughly uncoordinated textbook academic and an energetic boy who possessed absolutely zero understanding of baseline programming. Meanwhile, their primary competitors were a powerhouse team led by a boy named Marcus. I had noticed Marcus earlier. He was exceptionally arrogant but possessed undeniable, top-tier technical expertise. On the opening day, he had publicly challenged an assistant instructor regarding a hardware optimization detail. Currently, Marcus stood with his arms crossed, casting a thoroughly dismissive glance toward Julian's workstation, his eyes full of pure contempt. My chest tightened slightly, an intuitive suspicion surfacing. This wasn't an organic blind draw. Aiden had moved again. My intuition was flawless. Aiden's chess grandmaster strategy ran far deeper than I had anticipated. The moment the tournament commenced, the severe limitations of Julian's team became painfully apparent. Their robotic prototype stalled completely at the core drivetrain module. The baseline electric motors provided by the camp lacked the torque required to actuate the heavy mechanical arm. The uncoordinated academic teammate clutched his head in front of the terminal, while the energetic boy repeatedly assembled and disassembled the chassis, failing to find a structural solution. Julian knit his brows, repeatedly optimizing the software algorithms, attempting to leverage code to compensate for hardware deficits, but the results were minimal. Time ticked away rapidly. At the adjacent workstation, Marcus's team had already successfully navigated the Phase 1 validation tests, drawing a round of applause from the observers. Marcus shot a provocative look toward Julian's table. See that? That's what real engineering looks like. Julian's face was completely set, beads of sweat forming along his temples. This was the first time he was experiencing such severe frustration in his chosen domain. Standing at a distance, my heart twisted with anxiety. Right on cue, Aiden materialized. He adopted the persona of a benevolent corporate patron checking on the youth, stepping smoothly to the edge of Julian's workstation. Encountered a bottleneck, he asked, his tone remarkably gentle. Julian kept his mouth shut, nodding slightly. Aiden didn't directly manipulate the components, simply scanning their technical schematics before offering a casual remark. I recall that my company's research lab upstairs stocks a batch of custom German-engineered servo motors. The torque metrics are multiple times higher than these standard models. They might be exactly what you need to break the stud lock. He looked at Julian, his eyes full of hidden intent. Should I have my staff bring them down for you? In that exact second, I saw through Aiden's complete strategy. He had deliberately paired Julian with underperforming teammates, manufacturing a crisis that the boy's individual intellect couldn't resolve. Then, he would step onto the stage as the absolute savior, delivering premium resources that only a billionaire could provide. He wanted to make Julian realize, your intelligence and effort are valuable, but without your father's wealth and network, your dreams cannot move an inch. He wanted to cultivate a seed of absolute dependence in the boy's mind, an incredibly deceptive, sophisticated strategy. I saw a flash of conflict in Julian's eyes, an undeniable technical longing. To a child obsessed with engineering, high-end custom hardware was an almost irresistible temptation. I clenched my fists, my nails digging deep into my palms. Aiden wore a confident smile, waiting for Julian to ask for assistance, waiting for the critical piece of his strategy to lock into place. However, after a few seconds of silence, Julian lifted his head and shook it. Thank you for the offer, Mr. Aiden. But the tournament regulations explicitly state that we can only leverage the materials provided on site. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried an absolute, unyielding clarity. If we leverage your custom components, even if we secure a win, it wouldn't be legitimate. The smile on Aiden's face vanished instantly. He had likely never anticipated that a 10-year-old child could withstand such a sophisticated temptation. It's fine. Aiden quickly restored his smooth composure. Regulations are fixed, but scenarios are fluid. You are the most exceptional student in this camp. A little custom support is entirely reasonable. No thank you, Julian declined a second time. We want to rely on our own capabilities. With that, he turned back to his teammates. Let's pivot our strategy. Since raw torque is our deficit, can we alter the mechanical architecture? If we leverage a leverage mechanism or integrate a multi-stage gear train, we can amplify the force output mechanically. His words acted like a sudden flash of lightning, instantly illuminating the minds of the other two boys. Oh my God, why didn't I think of that? The academic teammate smacked his forehead, immediately modeling the new architecture on the terminal. Aiden stood frozen, his expression thoroughly unraveled. The script he had meticulously drafted had been ripped to pieces by the lead actor without a shred of ceremony. He wanted to play the omnipotent deity delivering a miracle, only to be hit with the raw integrity and grit of an ordinary child. The weight in my chest lifted entirely. I walked over to Julian's side, remaining silent, simply smoothing down his hair. He looked up, offering me a brilliant, radiant smile. In that moment, I felt a profound gratitude for the decade I had spent raising him. I hadn't merely poured knowledge into his mind, I had cultivated an independent, unyielding spine. When the tournament concluded, Julian's team didn't secure the championship. Marcus's team claimed the trophy with a near-flawless operational run. However, during the closing ceremony, after announcing the winners, Professor Daniel explicitly called Julian onto the stage. The elderly academic held the microphone, looking at Julian with immense admiration. Today, I witnessed many brilliant talents execute their tasks flawlessly. But there is one young man who demonstrated something far more valuable than raw talent. He demonstrated pure creative engineering and problem-solving wisdom. Julian, facing a severe hardware deficit relative to his competitors, refused to capitulate. Instead, He engineered a sophisticated leverage and multi-stage gear train architecture, successfully validating 80% of the operational matrix. His design possesses immense imagination. Remember, students? Professor Daniel's gaze swept across the auditorium. Premium resources can make you run faster, but only innovative thinking dictates exactly how far you can walk. The auditorium erupted into a thunderous ovation, far louder and longer than the applause delivered to the champions. Julian stood under the spotlight, his small frame perfectly erect. Down below, I saw Aiden's face turn incredibly dark. He had lost, completely and absolutely. Part 9. Aiden's remaining patience disintegrated completely on the final day of the camp, which was designated as the Family Celebration Gala. The resort's grand ballroom had been transformed, filled with elite families dressed in formal attire. It functioned simultaneously as a celebration for the youth and a high-stakes networking arena for the parents. As the primary corporate sponsor, Aiden was naturally the absolute gravity well of the room. He stood on the grand stage, delivering an eloquent address regarding Apex Capital's massive investment strategy in artificial intelligence, basking in the applause and admiration of the room. However, every time his gaze swept past my location, a trace of suppressed frustration flared in his eyes. I sat in a quiet corner of the ballroom, enjoying desserts with Julian, offering polite nods to the occasional parents attempting to initiate small talk. I remained a detached observer, watching Aiden's solo performance with complete indifference. Suddenly, a massive stir occurred at the grand entrance. A woman dressed in a vibrant red designer gown, dripping in high-end diamonds, made a grand entrance flanked by a team of private bodyguards. It was Victoria. She had arrived, navigating the floor in 4-inch stilettos, her chin held exceptionally high, presenting herself like a peacock asserting absolute ownership of the space. She marched directly toward the front row center, the seat reserved exclusively for Mrs. Aiden. On stage, Aiden's brows knit tightly the second he processed her presence. Her arrival was clearly outside his orchestration. Once Victoria took her seat, her gaze anchored onto me and Julian like a target-locked missile. Observing my complete composure and Julian, surrounded by a group of children asking him technical questions, her eyes flared with pure malice and jealousy. She picked up a glass of champagne, moving across the room toward our table. "Oh, if it isn't Sarah, the big-shot commercial photographer," she announced, her voice pitched perfectly to ensure the surrounding tables could hear every syllable. "I heard you've been vacationing here for the past few days. I trust the accommodations are comfortable?" Aiden has always been far too soft-hearted, extending such charity even to an ex-wife. Unlike certain individuals who remain divorced yet drag their child around, clinging desperately without a shred of dignity. The words were poisoned. Julian heard them clearly, instantly terminating his conversation to step to my side, staring at Victoria with immense vigilance. I gently patted his hand to ease his concern, looking up to offer Victoria a pleasant smile. "Yes, CEO Aiden is indeed remarkably soft-hearted," I said deliberately. "After all, a man capable of abandoning his own family for a mistress must possess a very unique kind of heart. Wouldn't you agree, Mrs. Aiden?" I drove the blade directly into her deepest scar. Victoria's face turned instantly pale, her hand shaking so violently the champagne trembled in her glass. What nonsense are you spouting? Whether it's nonsense is something you understand better than anyone else." My smile remained unyielding. "A word of advice: manage your own husband and ensure he stops running around trying to claim other people's children as his own. Because, believe it or not everyone is desperate to crawl through the gates of the Aiden family fortune." A few muffled laughs broke out from the adjacent tables. Victoria trembled with pure rage, raising her arm to hurl the champagne directly into my face. Before she could execute the motion, a powerful hand clamped onto her wrist like an iron vice. It was Aiden. He had descended from the stage, his face dark with fury as he stood between us. "Enough. Have you not made enough of a circus of yourself?" he growled, his voice thick with suppressed rage. "Aiden, did you hear what she said to me? She publicly humiliated me." Victoria shrieked. Aiden ignored her completely, his eyes locked onto mine, a look that seemed desperate to tear me apart. He likely felt that the elaborate strategy he had engineered had been entirely ruined by the two women standing before him. The entire ballroom's attention was now anchored completely on this high society drama. I stood up, taking Julian's hand, intending to exit the toxic space immediately. "Sarah," Aiden called out from behind me. "Do not walk away. We are settling this matter today." He violently shoved Victoria aside, stepping directly in front of me like an unyielding wall. "Fine," I met his bloodshot eyes, nodding slowly. "Let's settle it." I didn't engage in a public argument under the gaze of hundreds of onlookers. Instead, I pulled my phone from my bag, opened a specific digital interface, and held it directly in front of his eyes. It was an active email draft box. The recipient field contained a massive distribution list, the entire board of directors of Apex Capital, alongside the editorial mailboxes of over a dozen top-tier financial media outlets globally. The attachment title read, "Aiden, the Complete Decade Archive." Inside this archive, I dropped my voice to a whisper that only he could hear, lies our 10-year-old divorce decree, verified documentation of your infidelity with Victoria, comprehensive server logs of every corporate directive you issued to illegally target my photography studio, and, just now, a high-fidelity audio recording of your wife insulting my son. Oh, and I integrated a professional risk assessment report detailing exactly how a founder suffering from severe moral bankruptcy and loss of emotional control will catastrophically impact the brand equity and stock valuation of a publicly traded enterprise. Aiden's pupils contracted to the size of pinpricks the second he processed the screen. His entire body began to experience a slight, uncontrollable tremor. He understood with absolute clarity that the second this email was dispatched, the empire he had spent a decade building, the financial kingdom he prided himself on, would collapse into absolute ruin within 24 hours. This was my ultimate card, a nuclear option I had prepared long ago, reserved exclusively for an absolute crisis. "What do you want?" His voice was entirely hoarse, like sandpaper scratching against iron. "My terms are exceptionally straightforward." I retrieved my phone, locking my gaze onto his eyes. "Sign a legal release document. It contains a single clause. You, Aiden, voluntarily renounce every single claim, right, and title to Julian, including custody, visitation, and lineage association. Moving forward, neither you nor any member of your family is permitted to approach our lives in any capacity. Sign it, and this email remains an eternal draft. Aiden, you can choose your empire, or you can choose your supposed son. You can only keep one. The choice is yours." I stood before him, watching the man who had once demanded my complete submission finally exhibit an expression of total, absolute collapse. The war that had dragged on for 10 years had reached its final destination. The entire ballroom fell into a silence so profound you could hear the ice melting against the crystal glasses. Hundreds of gazes anchored onto our corner. Victoria stood pale and trembling, looking back and forth between Aiden and me, her lips moving but incapable of producing a sound. The title of Mrs. Aiden she prided herself on had transformed into the biggest joke in the room. As for Aiden, the tyrant who controlled every boardroom, he stared at me with an expression I had never seen before, a cocktail of shock, fury, terror, and absolute disbelief. He looked like a cornered beast, his muscles locked tight, his breathing heavy. He wanted to roar, to tear the phone from my hand, to destroy the evidence. But he didn't dare move because he understood the absolute reality of that email. It was an executioner's blade suspended over his empire, and I held the handle. "You are threatening me?" The words were forced out through his teeth. "No," I shook my head slightly, meeting his murderous gaze with absolute peace. "I am not threatening you, Aiden. I am presenting you with a choice, a decision you should have made 10 years ago." My voice was quiet, acting like a scalpel cutting away his sophisticated exterior to expose the rotted reality beneath. He wanted the son, a perfect heir to validate his genetic superiority and offset his household failures. But he desired his corporate empire far more, the kingdom built on a decade of cold calculation and aggressive expansion. He wanted to possess everything, but the universe doesn't operate on such charity. Time ticked away second by second, the air in the ballroom completely petrified. The guests whispered among themselves, analyzing the high-stakes drama. Sweat formed along Aiden's temples, his chest heaving violently. I knew exactly what was occurring inside his mind, a brutal conflict between his arrogant ego and his cold, calculating business survival. Ultimately, the calculation won. He was a businessman at his core. A businessman excels at mitigating risk and cutting losses to preserve capital. Risking his entire fortune and reputation for a son he had never raised, a boy he could never truly control, the ROI simply didn't check out. Slowly, very slowly, he closed his eyes. When he reopened them, all the rage, conflict, and defiance had vanished, leaving behind an absolute, dead grayness, the color of absolute capitulation. Fine, he uttered a single word, as if it required every remaining ounce of his vitality. His posture slumped slightly, his frame curving inward. 10 years later, the billionaire finally bowed his head before me. Hearing that single word, Victoria jolted as if hit by a physical blow, nearly losing her balance. She processed that everything was over. Aiden had chosen his empire, and she, along with the family structure she represented, had been sacrificed as mere collateral damage. I felt no shock, nor did I feel a sudden burst of joy. Everything had executed exactly according to plan. I retrieved my phone, permanently deleting the email draft and the archive folder from the device. Tomorrow morning at 9, my legal counsel will deliver the formal agreement to your office. I looked at him as if staring at a complete stranger. I expect to see your signature before he exits. With that, I took Julian's hand and walked toward the exit. Julian was incredibly well-behaved, asking absolutely no questions. He simply gripped my hand tightly, the warmth of his small palm delivering an absolute sense of peace. I guided him through the crowd, exiting the grand doors of the ballroom. Behind us lay the collapsing universe of Aiden and Victoria, a lavish feast beginning to dissolve. Ahead of us lay the crisp moonlight and a completely new life. My high heels clicked sharply against the marble floor, the most beautiful, resonant echo of absolute victory I had heard in 10 years. Part 10. The next morning at exactly 9 o'clock, my legal counsel, Mr. Davis, arrived at the penthouse executive suite of Apex Capital. Mr. Davis was a top-tier family law attorney, renowned for his cold professionalism and ironclad documentation. We had reviewed the agreement line by line at least a dozen times, ensuring absolute legal execution without a single vulnerability. Aiden didn't face him personally. The transaction was handled by Ryan and Apex Capital's corporate legal team. The entire process took less than 10 minutes. Once their legal team validated the document, Ryan carried it into the private executive office. A few minutes later, he emerged with the executed agreement, 2 copies, Aiden's signature sweeping across the page, though the ink bore a trace of uncharacteristic instability. Mr. Davis meticulously verified the signature, slid our copy into his briefcase, shook hands with the corporate counsel, and exited without uttering a single unnecessary word. At 9:20, my phone rang. Miss Sarah, the matter is fully resolved. Thank you for your hard work, Mr. Davis. It was my professional privilege. Congratulations. Mr. Davis's tone carried a rare, genuine note of admiration. He had managed countless high society divorces, but he had never witnessed a woman secure such an absolute, clean victory. When I hung up, I was sitting by the window at Chrono's studio, holding a warm mug of coffee. The winter sun filtered through the glass, incredibly warm. I opened my phone contacts, permanently deleting Aiden's number. Then, I accessed my terminal, dragging the encrypted folder named War into the trash, clicking permanent deletion. The massive weight that had anchored itself to my chest for a decade was entirely gone. I felt an unprecedented sense of absolute lightness and liberty. The war that had occupied my youth had reached a perfect conclusion. I won not merely because I forced Aiden to sign that release, but because moving forward, my destiny would never possess a single thread connecting to that man. My universe was finally completely quiet. That evening, I personally prepared a massive dinner filled with Julian's favorite dishes. During the meal, Julian lowered his utensils, looking at me with absolute seriousness. "Mom, that Mr. Aiden won't come looking for us ever again, right?" he asked. A child's perception is far more sophisticated than adults assume. He hadn't spoken of the drama over the past few days, but his mind had clearly accumulated questions and anxiety. I lowered my bowl, smoothing down his hair, deciding to speak with him with absolute transparency. "Julian, remember what I told you? Legally speaking, you only have a mother. Biologically, that man was indeed your father. But he abandoned the responsibilities of fatherhood before you were even born. For 10 years, he failed to execute a single duty. Therefore, he does not possess the right to be called a father. The events of the past few days were simply me resolving the remnants of the past. Now everything is completely finalized." I looked into his eyes, speaking with absolute certainty. "Starting today, he and every member of his family will never appear in our lives again. Our universe belongs exclusively to the two of us." Julian's eyes slowly welled with tears. He didn't weep. Instead, he stood up, walked over to my chair, and wrapped his small arms tightly around my neck. "Mom," his voice was muffled, thick with a soft sob. "Thank you." I didn't know exactly how many complex emotions were loaded into that thank you. Perhaps gratitude for protecting his peace, perhaps for delivering a quiet universe, or perhaps because I had never abandoned him. I returned the embrace, holding his warm, small frame close, my heart melting entirely. "Silly boy, if your mother doesn't protect you, who else would?" That weekend, a few sparse notices regarding Apex Capital appeared in the obscure corners of the financial journals. Aiden, founder of Apex Capital, has finalized a dissolution of marriage with his spouse, Victoria. The latter secures a substantial property settlement, but surrenders all corporate voting shares. The board of directors of Apex Capital undergoes a minor restructuring. Aiden retains his position as the primary shareholder, his absolute corporate control remaining unaffected. The entire matter was processed with extreme discretion and speed, creating absolutely no public ripples. Aiden preserved his empire, and I preserved my entire universe. A week later, I announced a 1-month fully paid sabbatical for the entire staff at the studio. Then I booked 2 international tickets to New Zealand. I asked Julian if he wanted to see the cleanest, most magnificent night skies in the universe. He nodded aggressively, his eyes sparkling with pure anticipation. It was time to take my baby boy to see how expansive and gentle the universe could truly be. A universe void of hatred, void of calculation, filled exclusively with sunlight, green earth, and brilliant stars. Part 11. Another 10 years passed. Time flowed like a river, mapping out another massive stretch of existence. In Lausanne, Switzerland, at the Federal Institute of Technology, the Grand Auditorium was hosting the World Artificial Intelligence Summit. A slender, remarkably sharp young man stood on the grand stage, speaking in flawless, commanding English as he introduced his latest breakthrough to an audience comprising the world's top scientists and venture capitalists, a pioneering cognitive architecture integrating effective computing with autonomous machine learning models. His name was Julian. At 20 years old, he was the youngest doctoral candidate at the elite institution and the most celebrated rising star in the global AI ecosystem. He was composed, confident, sharp in his delivery, his eyes flashing with pure intellectual passion and profound wisdom. Every slide he delivered drew nods of admiration and enthusiastic applause from the room. I sat in the absolute front row center, dressed in a minimalist cream-colored luxury gown, holding a compact Leica camera, my lens continuously tracking the silhouette on stage. My face bore an uncontainable expression of pride and fulfillment. Over these 20 years, I had personally witnessed his absolute evolution, from the stubborn boy who maintained his integrity at the summer camp to the young scientist commanding a world-class stage today. He had become the absolute realization of everything I had hoped for. As for myself, Chrono Studio had long since evolved into one of the most influential commercial creative agencies across the continent. However, I had stepped back from daily operations, living primarily as a fine art photographer, traveling globally to create work. My collections were exhibited in major museums worldwide, securing numerous international distinctions. Critics referred to me as the poet who writes the soul through light and shadow. Mother and son had both fully realized the absolute potential of their destinies. When the presentation concluded amidst thunderous applause, Julian descended from the stage, walking directly toward my position. He retrieved the camera from my hands, his other hand naturally taking mine, exactly as he had done during childhood. "Mom, how did I perform today? Did I disappoint your expectations?" he asked with a smile, his eyes as clear as they had always been. "Of course not. You are my greatest achievement," I said softly, adjusting his slightly shifted tie. Right then, a man dressed in a sharp corporate suit, presenting himself clearly as a personal assistant, approached us with absolute deference, extending a premium business card. "Dr. Julian, hello. Our principal, Mr. Aiden, observed your presentation and holds immense admiration for your genius. He wishes to invite you and Ms. Sarah to join him for dinner this evening, if your schedule permits." I received the card. It bore only a single name and a private number, Aiden. My heart experienced absolutely no ripple, as if I were hearing the name of an obscure entity long since buried in the past. Julian scanned the card, then offered a polite shake of his head to the assistant. "My apologies, but my evening is fully committed." He smiled, tightening his grip on my hand. "I am spending it with the most important person in my life." The assistant paused for a fraction of a second, then delivered a professional bow and exited the space. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught sight of a figure standing in the deep shadows near the grand exit of the auditorium, a man with stark white hair, his silhouette visibly curved with age. He stood at a massive distance, his frame blurred by the dim lighting, watching us from afar with an expression loaded with an emotion we had long since lost the capacity to decode. It was Aiden. We hadn't seen him once over the past 10 years. Occasionally, his face would appear in the financial journals, looking increasingly aged, increasingly isolated. Word in the industry was that following his divorce from Victoria, he had never remarried. The Apex capital empire remained massive, but he occupied it entirely alone. He had traded a decade to preserve his kingdom and spent the following decade consuming absolute, infinite loneliness. We didn't take a single step toward his position, nor did we grant him a secondary glance. Julian held my hand, guiding me out of the auditorium. Outside, the Swiss afternoon sun was magnificent, the snow-covered peaks of the Alps gleaming in the distance. "Mom, let's get fondue at that place you love tonight," Julian suggested happily. "Sounds perfect. And after dinner, we can walk along Lake Geneva. I want to take a portrait of you." "Awesome." Julian suddenly paused his steps, looking at me with absolute sincerity. "Mom, thank you for giving me a universe void of chaos, a complete, warm home." I smiled, my eyes dampening slightly. I reached up, gently brushing against his sharp jawline. "Silly child, because you are my entire universe." Under the sun, we smiled at one another. Behind us lay the permanently sealed past. Ahead of us lay our brilliant, infinite future. Exiting the venue, the warmth of the Swiss afternoon sun completely dissolved the remaining chill of the indoor air conditioning. Julian held my hand, his stride light and energetic, looking like a young child who had just secured a perfect grade, waiting for his mother to reward him with candy. "Mom, where to next? Want to check out that antique camera boutique you mentioned yesterday?" "Let's do it," I laughed. "But we need to feed you first. Looking at you now, you look like you could devour an entire steakhouse." "Absolutely. Today burned through every single one of my brain cells." He made a dramatic face, making me laugh out loud. Our dynamic had never distanced with his growth. Instead, we had drawn closer, functioning as allies, confidants, and the most secure anchors in one another's destinies. Returning to the hotel suite, Julian went to shower while I began organizing the digital assets on my terminal. Every single frame captured him standing at the center of the world stage, radiating absolute brilliance. Right then, the doorbell rang. I felt a slight surprise. We weren't expecting any visitors at this hour. Opening the door, I found myself facing Ryan. He looked significantly older now, his deference carrying a trace of distinct anxiety. "Miss Sarah, my apologies for the intrusion." He delivered a deep bow, extending a beautifully crafted black envelope with both hands. "Mr. Aiden instructed me to deliver this to you and Dr. Julian. He stated that this represents the asset he owed you both for 20 years. Regardless of how you choose to dispose of it, the execution carries absolute finality." With that, he delivered another profound bow, turning to walk away rapidly, as if remaining an extra second would constitute a severe violation. I shut the door, holding the weighted envelope, my internal state remaining perfectly still. Aiden had executed another move. Was it an equity transfer? A high-value check? Those instruments had failed to move me a decade ago. Today, they were nothing more than scrap paper. Julian emerged from the bath, noticing the envelope in my hand, stepping over with absolute curiosity. What is he playing at now? Unclear. I handed the envelope to him. Perhaps a final gasp. Julian opened it. Inside lay no corporate checks, no legal instruments, only a minimalist card alongside a custom-engineered, encrypted flash drive. The card bore Aiden's familiar handwriting, still sweeping, but the lines had lost their aggressive edge, reflecting an absolute weariness and age. It contained only 2 lines. "Julian, let this communication stand as reality. The decryption key is your birthday. Whether to access it rests entirely on your choice." Julian held the card, remaining silent for a long moment. I didn't pressure him. He was a fully mature adult, possessing absolute agency and judgment. I had shielded him from the storm during his youth. Today, it was his prerogative to decide whether to touch the remnants of the past. After a long silence, he lifted his eyes, clear and unyielding. "Mom, I want to access it. Not because I harbor any expectations, nor because I wish to acknowledge a connection," he explained precisely. "Simply, as an independent entity, I possess a purely analytical curiosity regarding the source that constructed half of my genetic blueprint. I want to understand exactly what kind of entity shaped that portion of my existence." I processed his meaning flawlessly. It wasn't an act of forgiveness, nor was it a reconciliation. It was a young scientist executing a detached, rational investigation into his origins. I nodded, offering a smile of absolute trust. "Fine. We will review it together." Julian connected the flash drive to the terminal, an encryption prompt appearing instantly. He entered his 8-digit birth date, the decryption validated on the first attempt. The directory opened. It contained absolutely no corporate secrets, no asset ledgers, only a series of text documents organized chronologically by year and date. The initial document was created a decade ago, on the day following the conclusion of the summer camp. The title read, "To my son Julian, the first unsent communication." Mother and son sat side by side in front of the terminal, the room quiet save for the steady scroll of the mouse. The document's titled Unsent Communications functioned like a silent biography unfolding before our eyes. The author was Aiden, spanning an absolute decade. The initial letters written after the summer camp were saturated with absolute defiance, rage, and frustration over his failed strategy. He systematically analyzed his tactical errors, cursing my rigidity and labeling Julian as an obstinate child, the classic narrative of a tyrannical CEO enduring absolute defeat. Reading this, Julian smirked, his face expressing complete disdain. The subsequent entries maintained a similar frequency. He attempted various strategies: corporate pressure, media manipulation, investigating Julian's academic path. But every single avenue was blocked and neutralized by my defenses. His communications resembled project post-mortem reports, filled exclusively with calculation and cold cost-benefit analysis. The paradigm shifted roughly a year into the archive. On that specific date, he abandoned the metrics of winning and losing. He wrote, "Today, I accessed that journalism feature regarding Chronos for the 17th time. Ryan claims I have descended into an absolute obsession. Perhaps. I simply cannot comprehend how, Inside that dilapidated loft, you could nurse a crying infant while simultaneously executing imagery so warm and radiant. I instructed my real estate division to acquire that historic sector. The building has been demolished. I stood on the rubble for hours. It appears I am finally processing exactly what asset I permanently discarded. From that specific date, the frequency of the letters shifted entirely. He no longer strategized a reclamation. He became a silent observer. He functioned like a ghost, tracking the metrics of our lives from afar. Julian started middle school today. She delivered the address as the student representative. I secured the media stream. She exhibits absolutely no stage fright, vastly superior to my own youth. She stated her ambition is the expanse of the stars. Magnificent. You secured another international distinction, the Red Dot Design Award. Standing on that stage, your smile was remarkably unburdened, truly beautiful. Truly beautiful, 100 times more radiant than the day you wore that wedding dress. I secretly attended Julian's middle school orientation. I took a seat in the absolute back corner. No one recognized my presence. The educators lauded her performance and her empathy toward her peers. The withdrawn child in her class has opened up significantly due to her companionship. Sarah, you raised her far better than my imagination could scale. Today is my birthday. I am celebrating it entirely alone. Victoria's daughter delivered a gift, exceptionally expensive, but I understand she instructed her assistant to charge it to the corporate account. I suddenly wonder what Julian delivers to you. Does she still create artwork by hand or engineer custom props like her childhood? He resembled a pathetic admirer, secretly documenting the minutiae of our existence, leveraging language to discharge every ounce of his envy, jealousy, regret, and hidden pride. He ceased to refer to me as that woman writing you directly. He no longer labeled Julian, that child, writing Julian, or my child. As the timeline scaled forward, his tone grew increasingly quiet, reflecting an absolute age. He recorded his legal separation from Victoria, his systematic purging of corrupt executives within his firm, and his long hours sitting alone in an empty executive suite staring at our public imagery. He began to interrogate the value of his own existence, analyzing exactly what capital and authority truly meant. The final entry was timestamped right before the summit commenced. Tomorrow, I will observe her with my own eyes. Not through a digital stream, not through a photograph, but the living, breathing reality of her standing on the absolute pinnacle of the world stage. I do not dare harbor the expectation that she will acknowledge my existence, nor do I possess the audacity to hope for a single word. I simply want to see the absolute masterpiece I am proudest of, to see the magnificent tree you spent 20 years of vitality cultivating. Sarah, thank you. Thank you for choosing not to inform me of her existence back then. If I had processed the reality during that period, I would have undoubtedly leveraged the absolute worst methods, destroying her and destroying you. Thank you for preserving her integrity and leaving me with a final, fragile point of reference. This drive contains the complete record of my decade of repentance. Delivering it to you means I have executed an absolute release. My empire, the wealth I once prided myself on, I intended to bequeath it to her, but she possesses absolutely zero utility for it. Magnificent. I have instructed my attorneys to establish a charitable foundation. Upon my passing, the entirety of my assets will liquidate into it, dedicated exclusively to funding brilliant youth from impoverished backgrounds who possess immense talent in foundational sciences. Let the name of Aiden touch her universe in a different paradigm, leaving a faint, benign trace. I wish you both absolute peace. The text terminated there. Julian and I remained in absolute silence for a long time. Outside the window, the peaks of the Alps were cast in the golden light of the setting sun. The man had made his entrance via the most atrocious strategy, yet executed his exit through the most isolated posture, completing a decade-late act of self-salvation. This was no longer an act of war, nor was it a standard grievance. It was a human soul, processed through the long river of time, delivering a heavy, pale soliloquy. Following our return from Switzerland, reality maintained its regular tracks. Julian continued his research, occasionally navigating international flights to attend scientific symposiums. I packed my gear, preparing for my next creative journey. My destination was Iceland. I wanted to capture the aurora borealis. The flash drive was locked securely inside the safe in the study by Julian. Neither of us spoke of it again. Those unsent communications were like a stone thrown into a deep lake, generating a brief ripple before sinking into the absolute depths, never to be disturbed. Our destinies would never alter their vectors due to a repenting soul. The day before my flight to Iceland, Julian suddenly remarked, "Mom, let's visit Grandma and Grandpa." My parents had passed away during her infancy. Over the years, during the spring remembrance weeks and their specific anniversaries, I would bring Julian to manage their resting place. I felt a slight surprise at her bringing it up now, but I readily consented. The cemetery was exceptionally quiet, surrounded by green pines. We cleared the grass from the headstones, replacing the old arrangements with fresh white daisies. I took a few steps back, giving Julian her private space. She stood before the headstones of my parents, remaining quiet, as if executing a silent dialogue with two ancestors she had never known in life. After a long moment, she spoke, her voice clear and resonant. "Grandpa, Grandma, hello. I am Julian. I am 20 now, pursuing my PhD in Lausanne, focusing on cognitive computing architectures. Mom mentioned that Grandpa was a university professor specializing in physics. I believe I inherited a portion of your intellectual blueprint. Over these years, Mom raised me exceptionally well, shielding me from every storm. She single-handedly delivered an absolute, beautiful universe full of abundance and love. She is the most formidable woman I have ever known." She paused, taking a deep breath, her voice gaining an absolute, unyielding intensity. "Regarding my origin, I understand everything completely. I harbor no resentment, nor do I maintain any longing. Every individual must bear the absolute weight of their choices. He chose his path, and I possess the path shared between my mother and myself. My surname is Sarah's. I carry my mother's lineage. I am a child of the Sarah family, your grandchild. My roots anchor here, right beside my mother. That is all the reality I require. Rest easy. Moving forward, I will protect her exactly as she protected me during my youth. I will ensure she remains the happiest woman in the universe." Once finished, she delivered 3 deep, formal bows to the headstones. The afternoon light filtered through the canopy, dancing across her young, powerful silhouette, framing her in a warm halo of gold. Standing behind her, watching the person I had single-handedly raised, a profound sense of absolute peace and completion filled my soul. My son had fully grown. He didn't merely possess an intellect that surpassed his peers. He had cultivated a mature, clear, grateful heart capable of bearing absolute responsibility. He was the absolute pride of my existence. On the drive back, my phone buzzed with a breaking financial notification. The headline was exceptionally striking. Aiden, founder of Apex Capital, announces absolute resignation from all corporate holdings, transfers over $100 billion in personal wealth to the Polaris Charitable Foundation. The article detailed that the foundation would be managed by an international blind trust, focusing exclusively on identifying and funding youth globally who demonstrated exceptional genius in foundational sciences, with an absolute priority directed toward impoverished backgrounds. Aiden himself had completely exited the corporate arena, his subsequent location remaining unknown. The accompanying visual asset was a recent photograph, his hair completely white, his face showing significant signs of age, but his gaze was remarkably still, like a deep well without a single ripple. I finished reading the notification, experiencing absolutely no shock, nor did I indulge in sentimentality. Everything had reached an absolute conclusion. He preserved his empire, then personally disassembled it, leveraging a sophisticated vector to execute his final compensation and exit from the stage. Moving forward, the universe no longer possessed an individual named Aiden. There remained only a foundation named Polaris, quietly illuminating the future. As for ourselves, we had finally turned the page on the old ledgers, rushing toward the vast, boundless horizon that belonged exclusively to us. I didn't share the article, nor did I archive it. I simply pressed permanent deletion. Outside the car window, the cityscape moved past rapidly. Julian turned her face toward me, a bright smile on her features. Mom, are the tickets to Iceland fully validated? The weather models show a massive aurora storm next week. Fully validated, I smiled, every remaining cloud in my heart completely burned away by the sun. We are going to see the most beautiful scenery in the world. She nodded aggressively, her eyes flashing with pure light. With the most beautiful mother in the world. I looked at her and suddenly recognized that our destination, the aurora itself, was entirely secondary. Because the most brilliant, eternal light in my life was sitting right beside me, within arm's reach.